The woods like we see here at the Lost 40, the big trees, the understory like it is, that hasn't always been that way. It might not always be that way. When we're managing a site, what are we managing it for? We're trying to, in the Scientific and Natural Areas program, think about those features. Why was this site designated to start with?
With this project idea. So to start us off, I'm just gonna have each of you introduce yourselves, just a bit about your role, and then we'll kind of get into our questions.
Okay. My name is Sam Jones. I teach geography at Bemidji State and dabble in tree ring research.
My name is Richa Dhakal. I am currently pursuing my master's in environmental studies at Bemidji State University.
I'm Jason Ewert. I was the filmmaker, producer, director of the documentary you just watched. And I think, there we go.
I'm Arika McGraw. I am the regional naturalist for the Scientific and Natural Areas program, which is part of the Minnesota Department of Natural Areas. Did I double that? Did I say that wrong? Scientific and Natural Areas within the DNR.
If I've learned anything, it's that we love acronyms. So it's a mouthful. Okay, so Jason, we're gonna start with you. What made you want to be a filmmaker, and why did you feel it's important for our community to learn about our local history?
I really like telling stories in general, and I don't have a specific kind of story that I like more than others, whether it's a documentary about what we just watched, or if it's a weird, spooky movie. I just like telling stories. And I just think that comes from just being absorbed in movies and video rental stores as a kid, and just being infatuated with media and TV, and and I'm not really good at communicating through my words, so it's a little easier to put it together when I can orchestrate it. And have all the ingredients, whether I've gone out and shot it or I have an interview, and I can piece it together how I can imagine it in my head, rather than trying to communicate it with my words, which I'm not always really good at. But when it comes to local stories, I think perspective is everything. And the more that you know about your community, the more that you know about nature and what is available to us as Minnesotans or Bemidjians or whatever it is, I think the more perspective we have as humans, we're able to connect more with each other and to be able to have empathy, be able to have a perspective, and it maybe to be able to even have a simple conversation with somebody about something that's other than your very limited knowledge. If you have that perspective, you're able to maybe carry on a conversation longer than 3 minutes and then awkwardly stare somewhere else. So I'm all about perspective, and the more perspective, I think, the better.
I love that. We're gonna stick with you for one more. So what first drew you to tell the Lost 40 story, and what kind of made you bring that to Lakeland, as an idea you wanted to pursue this year?
Yeah, I had heard about the Lost 40. I think it was maybe through the kids at school, or I'm originally from here, and I didn't really know it existed, and I was watching movies and TVs or playing video games, and I didn't really have a desire to get out and see different places farther than my own house. But when me and my family moved back to the Bemidji area about a decade ago, we heard from other people who were like, "You haven't heard about the Lost 40? This really cool place?" And no. So we went there, but we went at the wrong time of year, where it was just it was just pure mosquitoes. And if you've ever been there when it's not spring or fall, it's torture. Why would you do that to yourself? But I wanted to know more, and I like a little bit more of interest and a little spice to the stories that we tell. So the Lost 40 already has that baked into the title, and so I want to know more. And usually when I approach a project, I'm most of the time kind of clueless. So as I'm learning it from the experts, and I'm interviewing them and doing the research, I'm learning as we go, so that as I'm putting it together and in the edit and showing it, I can do it through the eyes of somebody who's learning as well, so that anybody who can watch it can also like learn as I learned. So that's kind of the approach that I took on this.
Perfect. Well, we're really glad you picked this subject. Arika, we'll switch to you. You kind of mentioned that part of your job is working with the public, and so I know you do that a lot. Do you have a favorite experience or story from some of your public meetups or activities you want to share?
There's a lot. I kind of mentioned in the documentary that some of my events don't always get a lot of people. So honestly, my favorite events are the ones where I've got at least a handful of people. And the ones it always warms my heart and makes me feel like I'm actually doing something good is at the end, people are always like, oh, thank you so much. Thank you. This is great. I'm like, no, thank you for coming. And it's always really happy. But I've had a few really good events. I mentioned I did an orchid walk up at Lost Lake Peatland, which is near Tower, Minnesota. I knew there was going to be people. I call it an orchid walk. Of course, there's people are going to show up. So that one was great. But then I also have reoccurring snowshoes that I really like. I usually try to do about 3 a year. And there's one that I do that's weather dependent, is usually really successful. I do one at Burnside Islands, SNA, which is at Burnside Lake outside of Ely. And I always do it at the same time as Ely Winterfest. So again, easy pickings. A lot of people usually sign up for that one, and it's always a lot of fun. And we have a really great group of people. And this last year when I did it, a couple of the people who came had actually gone on a different snowshoe I had done the previous year at Chisholm Point Island, which is outside of Grand Rapids in Pokegama Lake. And that day that they came to that one, it was like -20 with a wind chill of -35 or something. And I did it with a contractor who does nature events and whatnot. And so she had actually gotten quite a few people to sign up, but because of the weather, about half of them canceled. But we still had like 10 people come, and they braved the cold. We walked out to an island. We didn't really talk much on the way to the island, but we all made it there and we all had a great time. So any event that people come to, honestly, it's always fun.
I can relate. I'm happy all of you showed up for this event because you're always putting yourself out there, trying to get the community in, and we appreciate any time those of you guys want to interact. Jason, the Lost 40 is such like a dense area of forest, and there's such giant trees there. Did you have any challenges when you were filming to kind of have that translate to the viewer?
Yeah, I want to First, I should say, I want to give a shout out to Eric Callahan, who was my drone pilot, filmmaker in his own right, and an awesome camera guy. He usually helps me on my documentaries, and he did a phenomenal job. We had to do a lot of research beforehand, especially, I think specifically when it comes to filming nature and stuff, we just kind of like go in with everything that we got and hope for the best. And we got really lucky with that part. The part that is the most challenging is working with different entities. Honestly, like we're working with the state, we're working with federal, and everybody has their own kind of way of doing things. So like you get multiple permits for doing the same thing. So like if you're shooting with a drone, you need to clear the airspace. You need to make sure that the federal government knows what's happening and the local with the state, and they're all different. There's so much paperwork involved, and that part gets me the most anxious because like I hope I did everything right. Like every T crossed, every I dotted, and at the speed of things happen, like they can either go really fast or very slow, and so like making sure that I'm talking to all the right people is usually was the biggest challenge with this. But I worked with some phenomenal folks. I mean, these guys are awesome. They are so cool. And then like going into it, like making sure that I think the biggest thing is like making sure I brought enough batteries because there's just like no power out there. So like you bring in tons of batteries and making sure everything is charged beforehand, and having a power supply that is charging at the same time. And it was like super flooded. Like there was like the some of the signs that you go to like read, and they were like out in the middle of like water, and like so I couldn't even go into different places. But it was just like, I don't know, it was an adventure. That's kind of how I see it, and like just bring everything I got and hope for the best type of thing.
I hope you brought rain boots to put out there. Were there any stories or shots that didn't make the final cut? You know, having so many SNAs in our state and so much history in the last 40, and you had to put that into 26 minutes essentially when you put our breaks run. And how was there anything that didn't make the cut that you kind of want to share?
Sure. Yeah. Well, like a lot of Erica's stories were like really fun, and like they like. Just trying to keep it like just like for myself, like if we have like 3 hours of footage, like how do I, like it's all important to me. It's all like all my babies. I'm learning as I go here, and I'm editing it together. I'm like, I don't really want to take this out. This is like, but they're like when I approach usually a documentary, I think who's my experts, and I can trust that their narrative. They know what they're talking about, so that I can just follow their lead and where it goes. Like I had a lot of like preconceived notions that we're going to be talking about this, the mystery of the Lost 40 the whole time. But where we went with SNAs in general was just so fantastic. I just loved that part of it, and to learn more about really amazing places through the lens of the Lost 40, which is amazing. So that part to me, but the parts that were cut out was a lot of like Erica's stories were really good about like kids learning what an esker was in the weirdest, funniest ways, or like, like they wanted to push each other off the esker. Don't push me off the esker. Or like her saying like, am I getting through to them? And then them saying that was like her moment of like, I'm getting through to them. That I loved that moment. Unfortunately, it didn't quite fit. But I think that's the first thing that pops into my mind anyways.
Perfect. Erica, so we're talking about kind of the allure of the Lost 40 and kind of where the story was going to go. Do we know if any other errors have kind of happened or quirks that have kind of lend themselves to benefit conservation and protecting, more lands than maybe we knew of?
So I did ask around, but in this respect, the Lost 40 is pretty unique. However, there are all sorts of different ways lands become SNAs. I think one of the kind of quirky ways is, so our state has used to have a lot of prairie. A lot of it has been farmed and lost. Most of it has been lost. But part of our program, not part of mine because we don't have any prairie in the Northeast, but the rest of the state really does a lot with prairie. And some of the best prairies are actually found on old railroad beds in cemeteries. So we have multiple SNAs you'll find down in the South that are really long and skinny, and you're like, what is happening here? Well, it's an old railroad bed. So it's never been, other than putting the railroad ties in, the prairie hasn't been disturbed there. So that's kind of a different way of coming about it. And then other ways, like one of the most common ways is we have people who have their own land that they don't want it to disappear once they die or move on. So they come to us and say, hey, we think we have something really special. Is this something you would be interested in? And then we do have a very strict process that we go through asking certain questions. Does it meet these specific criteria? Because SNAs are very specifically special. And if it does, then we work with them to either to purchase it from them, or sometimes they donate it. And then we work with other partners like the Nature Conservancy. We have multiple SNAs that the Nature Conservancy had that they then transferred to us for our management of. So there's a lot of different ways that we get SNAs, and some of them have some fun stories along with them, but nothing quite like the Lost 40.
I didn't realize how many SNAs I've probably been to until I saw your picture of the yellow sign. And I said, oh, wait, that is familiar. So I don't know if anyone else here maybe had that thought. Is there another SNA location that is your like must visit that we should all add to our list?
All of them. No. So there's quite a few. I think some of my favorites are also a lot of everyone else's favorites. We've got quite a few on the North Shore that are really unique and really beautiful to go view for various reasons, easy to get to. A lot of them aren't super easy to get to, so that kind of plays into it. But if you go to our website, we have either you can type it into the search bar or it's on the SNA's page about Minnesota's wild places. And during COVID or shortly after COVID, we kind of categorized a handful of SNAs that are great for visiting in person. They're easy to get to, they have facilities, trails, different things like that. So that's a great place to look to find some easy, low-hanging fruit of SNAs to visit, and there's a couple from each of our regions. They also have a list of SNAs that are like, these are great to visit virtually. They aren't that easy to get to, but we have videos of them, we have photos of them, so that's a great place to go. But I guess I can say one of my favorite named SNAs, because some of our SNAs we have short, boring names to long, complicated names to some really goofy names. And my favorite up here in the Northeast is Little Too Much Lake SNA. We also almost had Big Too Much Lake, but that didn't quite fit the parameters of the SNA program, so just stuck with Little Too Much.
Thank you. We're going to switch gears a bit here and talk to Sam and Richa. So as we were planning this event and really talking about the importance of old growth forests and what that does for us, we were kind of introduced to Sam and Richa and the work they're doing here. And so we thought it was a great tie-in to this event. So do you guys want to provide kind of an overview of the research that you're doing on fire history reconstruction in old growth forests?
So our research focus on reconstructing the fire regime and how actually the wildfire possibility is being increasing. We are just planning to integrate the dendrochronology to assess the fire frequency, seasonality, temporal variability, and fire return interval. So as we know that trees are actually the best physical timekeepers, it means that each tree ring is a year. So they actually record every disturbance like fire safely in their structure. So of course the last 40 kind of forest patch, which is old growth forest, is a perfect example, and they are the valuable resource to study about the disturbance ecology. So this kind of research especially provides a very brief forest management strategy, which really helps to mitigate the wildfire risks, and it also enhances the ecosystem resilience.
And what made you guys kind of start this research on this project?
That was a little bit by accident, actually. So the film mentioned old growth, and that's part of the tree ring work that we do in the tree ring lab, is to look at core samples from potential old growth candidate stands with Minnesota DNR and just process those cores, read them under a microscope, and get accurate ages. So the interest initially in the site where this monster cookie, as we're affectionately calling it, has come from, was from the old growth part of Lake Bemidji State Park. And we were out there initially just taking a look at it to assess what is the damage to this old growth forest. Is there anything left? Is it a complete loss? Loss being, depending on how you look at disturbance, I suppose, loss versus reset. But anyway, we were out there just taking an estimate of the situation and realized, wow, some of these pieces have really interesting fire record in them that we didn't expect to see out there. So got in touch with the park to ask for a research permit, if we could collect some samples. And then Richa came on as a new grad student in January. So it was just sort of a combination of a few really nice pieces that came together at the right time for this to develop into a bigger research project rather than just what started as a curiosity. How many fire scars are there, and what are the, what's the return interval, what are the dates? And then Richa's interest in disturbance ecology has turned this into a bigger study. So it's been really kind of fun the way it worked out.
Yeah, perfect timing of everything. Why do you feel old growth specimens like the giant tree cookie are impactful for scientific research and studies in our natural area?
As Richa mentioned, trees are really good record keepers, storytellers, as it were, of recording everything that's happened in their environment, all that they've experienced in terms of changes, disturbance events, competition dynamics. All of that is recorded in that tree ring record. And they live much longer than we do. Their lifespans are so much longer. They have longer stories to tell. And we can take a look at that to just understand a deeper record of what was going on at a site and get the tree's perspective essentially on what matters for their growth and vitality. What are the things that maintain that system? The film alluded to this, and the pine forest fire is an important disturbance agent. For different forest communities, that disturbance regime is maybe something else, but being able to see that in the tree ring record gives us a longer view of what matters in those systems so that we can try to translate that to management and do our best to emulate that in the way that we're approaching forest management practices.
So then do you guys feel like there's a silver lining maybe from our storm that we experienced, unfortunately, last year with all these fallen trees? Are they now lending themselves to research like this?
Yes, of course. So the 2025 blowdown was really a destructive event, which has impacted the social and ecological aspect of environment. So being said this, I just want to add that without this kind of disturbance, we really can't research on the fallen trees, which are actually the great environmental record keeper.
So it's something we can at least think of when we see the downed trees, that there is a silver lining to some of that. Is there any questions from the audience that you guys have that you would like to ask before we wrap up?
With your research being done and Erica, you looking at the forest, has there been a schedule for a fire, or is that something being talked about?
So it is in the plans. So a bit of history with the SNA program, which we were founded in 1969. The rest of the state, the other 3 regions of the state, have been doing fire for forever because they have prairie, and prairies needs fire very, very much more often than a forest does. However, the historic thought was the best way to protect a forest was to just leave it alone. Clearly that is not correct, and a lot of people are coming around to the idea that some of these forests do indeed need fire to continue on. And I think Amber Beth mentioned in the documentary that we are a small program. Up until recently, it was just her and I, and then a year or 2 ago, we added a technician, so it's just the 3 of us. That is not a burn crew. But we have others that we work with, and we are starting to get momentum on bringing fire back to the northeast region of the SNA program. We actually have a different site that's kind of taken priority, Minnesota Point, which is down in Duluth. That is hopefully going to be burned, weather permitting and red paperwork permitting, this spring, or very shortly soon, if not this spring. That is a huge project that's been taking a lot of time, but a lot of really great partners have been working together with that, between the state, the city of Duluth, the community of people who live on the point, as well as tribal members from Fond du Lac, and many other partners as well that I'm probably forgetting. But we've all been working really close to bring fire back to Minnesota Point. So that's been kind of our first go. And then we have the Lost 40 and McGregor Marsh and McGregor that are also kind of up next in our planning thoughts. They each have very unique considerations, very different considerations from all three of them. As you can imagine, a marsh is different than 2 old growth forests. But the Lost 40 has a lot more work that needs to be done with it because it is very overcrowded with ladder fuels such as balsam. There's one of my transects that I have at the Lost 40. You go in and it's literally, you walk in and it's just balsam. There's nothing else growing on the ground, nothing else. It's just balsam, and balsam is highly flammable and has branches poking you in the eye all the way up to the top. So that one's going to require a lot more work before we start having ground fire. But it is eventually in the plans. It just might take us a little while.
Hi there. So interesting to learn about how a new research opportunity kind of emerged from the aftermath of a storm. Truly a silver lining. Question about the tree cookie. As it dries out, does that impact your ability to interpret like the tree rings? Do you feel like you're in a little bit of a race against time since you were able to access the tree after the storm?
To some degree, yes. You probably noticed if you look close at it, there's some cracks through there. So where those cracks are, it's possible to read past those, but it becomes a little more difficult. It's a little more challenging to essentially skip past that and go to the next ring when we're moving to the next stage now, which will be actually measuring the ring widths to cross-date that against a larger chronology just to statistically verify the dates that we've assigned to those rings right now, just visually counting. So as we get into that next stage, a little bit, yes. The nice thing with a cross-section like this is we can take a section of it where there's not a crack and just work with that, where the rings are intact for the full radius of the tree. As far as more samples on the ground, it's a little bit of a race to get out there and collect them before they're maybe damaged in the salvage and cleanup activities, or just lost to the regrowth that comes up, all of that foliage, underbrush, and whatever vegetation booms in the open canopy condition following all of the overstory trees being tipped over. So in some ways, yes, but there's usually ways to navigate around that too. It just becomes a little trickier, but good question, yeah. Richa, did you have anything to add to that? Okay.
I want to say thank you to our panelists for joining us. Thank you guys for coming, and I hope this inspired you to have a great Earth Day tomorrow and have some plans, maybe get out to the Lost 40 before the bugs really are in full effect. You guys can take a look at the tree cookie. They have some dates on there. It's really fun to find your birth year and realize how much longer that tree has been around. We have some stickers and stuff from Lakeland behind you, and Arika brought some really beautiful SNA stickers with the lady slipper on it. So we just want to thank you guys for coming, and if you have any questions, we'll be around.